All right, guys. Here we go. Let's go. Team, we're back for another live session. We're going to be talking youth baseball in this one. We got a question in our last live discussion asking about U12, U10, that age group, and how does ArmCare fit into that age demographic? So between all of these guys, we've got a ton of experience within baseball, but then also we're all dads. We're working with kids and helping them develop physically. So we're going to talk not just about the science, but actually the practical application. If you're a coach or you're helping out with a team, what's realistic to onboarding a kid this age into a strength and conditioning program? And I use that in quotes because I think people often get scared when they heard of strength training for kids. And we could definitely dovetail into a bigger topic on that, on how does strength training fit into a child's training program. But overall, I would say it's generally safe when coached well and guided appropriately, as with every age group. But ArmCare is going to look a little bit different than your traditional, I'm going to load up weight and try to move as much on the barbell as possible. But I don't want to get too far into the topic yet. First, I want to talk about last week we entered this discussion on how injuries are just like the hot topic in baseball right now, and it's specifically around the MLB level. Okay, there's been a lot of backlash on the MLB rule changes and how it's impacting pitchers and creating injuries. But I brought up the point that probably more significant than the injury incidence at the MLB level is the injury increase at the younger ages, and we got to really start focusing on this because it's really impactful for the sport as a whole, but then also for the development of young athletes. And so first, I want to focus on a study. This was published in 2011. So this is over 10 years ago, but this is the most current data. Maybe you've got some of the more recent, Ryan, but this was posted by the guys at ASMI, Fleisig, James Andrews. And they looked at almost 500 pitchers over the course of 10 years. And they found that 5% of youth pitchers are going to either quit the sport or going to end up having surgery. And that might not seem like a lot, but as they conclude in the study, if you're one of those 1 in 20 pitchers who are either dropping out of baseball because you're hurt or having to go through surgery, that's really impactful for you, especially if we can do something to reduce the risk of that. And I'll just also say the average age for those issues came up around 17 to 18 years old. But when we look at the range, we had a range of injuries occurring from 12 all the way up to 21. So there's not a bottom end of, well, we're just worrying about when they get to 17. We are seeing 12 and 13-year-olds ending up with surgery or having permanent lasting changes due to things that are occurring on the field. So let's start there. I'm going to kick it to the scientist, Ryan Croton, because I know you as a young athlete wound up in this situation yourself. Mm-hmm. And maybe that could be the silver lining, is if your kid does end up with a little leaguer's elbow, down the road, he'll end up with a PhD in biomechanics. But maybe it doesn't always turn out like that. So Ryan, why don't you talk a little bit about your experience, but then also let's talk about some of the science and data behind the injuries at this level and what ArmCare can do to reduce that risk.
Yeah, I mean, the current data the data that you had uncovered and the current data is the same. 5% of all pitchers, not just even it's even higher actually. It's roughly 20%, I believe, for college now are having surgery. Okay, for the pitchers, like it's tremendous. And kind of as you mentioned, you know, our young athletes, because this is what happened to me in Canada. You had to throw to your own team until the age of 10. So the beginning of my career, and I love pitching. That's all I wanted to do, really, is that you had to focus on throwing strikes, or your kids are not going to hit. So what happens is it's like it forces you to sort of focus on the accuracy. It dials down, you know, how hard you can throw, because you don't want to strike out your own players. But the moment I turned 11 and I could just absolutely let it eat, and we were pitching against each other, I played for 11U, 12U, and sometimes touched a 13U game, and I pitched in all of them. And I remember when my mother, she I don't know, she came downstairs and I was holding my arm and I didn't really know what was going on. I never had arm pain. And she said that, your elbow is really swollen. And I went to the orthopedic surgeon, the pediatric orthopedic surgeon, literally told me, you're never going to pitch again. What happens with our little leaguers, and especially now, they're bigger. Like the bodies of these kids are much heavier, much bigger. And the growth plates in my arm were so wide that the doctor said, look, at his age, if he keeps pitching repetitively like this piece of bone is going to rip right off. I'm going to have to screw it back in. And then now, you're going to have some foreign material to kind of keep your elbow together. The issues that we have with our young athletes is that their bones are growing and their ligaments, and tendons are attached, so they get stretched. When athletes don't have the requisite strength, when things are lengthening, that's when we start having a lot more muscle tears. We have a lot more growth plate issues. So like the biggest thing, people ask me too, how early should our kids start ArmCare? And it definitely can be any age, but I really do think, getting the habit, of them testing as early as possible, is the right way. And developing, even like they're young kids, even if it's not perfect. Like I know with my 6-year-old, he'll use the 3-pound bands, with me, and I'll actually hold his arms and guide him. I'll say, hey, lock your arms out, whatever it is. We're just going to do an ATYT. Like people think like, okay, I got to go through the entire program. Something is better than nothing. If your kid can only master one exercise, do that, because they can't like wait, long term. You pick up a kid's backpack. My son's backpack is probably 5% of his body weight. Sometimes it's heavy. And so I'm thinking to myself, okay, you got this backpack. I watch them walk like shoulders forward. They need the postural elements that do not, they're just not being fixed early on. And then they're looking at an MLB, and there's been studies. What is the course, the trajectory of injuries that are happening from the youth level? And I know we're talking about pitch counts, but they have to be strong enough to handle them.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the backpack issue because, a lot of people, they get concerned when you start talking about young athletes and doing any sort of strength training. And I usually think about, any kid who maybe grew up on a farm or, having to support a ranch, something like that. And if you looked at the physical demands of doing, just natural daily activities in that kind of environment versus, this kid shouldn't be lifting a 7-pound exercise band. It kind of falls apart. But you made a great point. My 9-year-old carries a 25-pound backpack around all day at school. Like,
Yeah.
let's put it in perspective. But I also want to talk about strength training as a tool to enhance development because, if I know Ryan, you're deep into Franz Bosch and the coordinated systems, and strength training isn't just about teaching muscles to contract forcefully, but it's also about teaching athletes to coordinate movements. And we can use resistance as a way to enhance and develop coordination. Now, of course, you have to apply that to sport-specific movements, but from a very young age, a lot of the athletic development happens by helping an athlete learn how to control their body better. And I think that's something that ArmCare does really well within the training. Is it's not just focused on building big muscles, but it's on enhancing the ability to stabilize joints and then move effectively. So I don't know if you have anything else to add to that idea on how do we also enhance performance through doing something like ArmCare?
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited because we got this course that hopefully comes out soon as the Strength Training Secrets course because, the global movement is important for them as well. And teaching athletes, like there's a progression. Like let's just first look at the stance. What kind of stability does the athlete have? Obviously, when they're bilateral, meaning two legs even together, and how they can control like Are they leaning back to do exercise, especially for the posterior chain? They don't have the core control to stand and apply tension at their shoulder. And then progress them to the contralateral, especially if they're playing baseball. So they're used to, a right arm doing exercise and the left leg being forward. And then the next progression would be ipsilateral, meaning that it's the same arm and the same leg forward. If I'm rowing with my left arm, then my left foot's forward. These things are all important because the coordination aspect and the strength in the coordination aspect on the field, that's what's going to really prevent injuries, and this strength training course that's going to come out, it shows a progression. You don't want to ever vertically load, a really young athlete. And you watch Russian
Do you mean like heavy back squats?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah.
On the neck, those kinds of things. So you watch like Russian training methodology, Eastern Bloc. Kids, they're working with very light barbells, like we're talking maybe 5 pounds on the side, but they're doing front squatting. They're not putting stuff directly on their back when they do those things, and they're training early. You'll see pictures of young kids competing, and there's an overlying concern. Oh, my kid's gonna have their growth's gonna be stunted, or they're gonna get hurt. And the way we're looking at it is saying, okay, this is unloaded for the spine. This is changing their motor patterns. It's forcing them to have core control that they don't have, and progressively, we're developing skill through there. Like even when we were in pro ball, I remember having conversations about our new Dominican players. Strength is a skill. You want the kid to hit the ball 425 feet, or throw, over 90 miles an hour. They can't just keep throwing to do it. They have to train. They have to develop the strength to contract. And, we have a process to doing that really safely, and anywhere, which is huge. There's really no excuse if, you don't need a coach. Great. It's great that you can have one, but if parents are saying, my son's too young to be put in a high performance program, well, the app will guide them and get them started. So, that they have to do it. I mean, they really do. People have to, as soon as the kids are throwing baseballs, they need, I know, I do bear crawls with my kids. I take them to, they do walking lunges, whatever it may be. They use the bands. There's a whole thing for, I got a 6 and a 4.5-year-old. Mm-hmm. I put parachutes on them to sprint, we got to get our kids. I banned them too and run like light mm-hmm. bands. So the resistance, we got to get our kids doing this, because the stronger their bodies are all around, the harder it is to kill them, for injury wise.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, also on that, just speaking of the literal harder to kill them, and everyone, there's this big mechanics versus strength, all these things. Everyone's always going to be angry about this. The example I like to use, and no one has still given me an answer for it, is if it's mechanics are what allow you to have healthy movements, whatever it may be, why is it that a baby, you can't just teach them to roll over? Well, it's simply because they're not strong enough to do so, which is why when you bring a baby home from the hospital, they're like, do not put it face down. It will die. It is not strong enough to roll over. But when they start learning to roll over, it's like, when Ace Ventura's got the darts and he's got no feeling,
mm-hmm.
like flipping around, that's not a good movement. But as they get stronger, they can be more coordinated, and then they roll over normal, and they can do all these different things. And it's like, you have to put them down on their belly so they can learn to pick their head up and build the muscles to do so. And then as they get stronger, it looks more natural, as opposed to the seal trying to get out of the ice hole in the Arctic. It's like, it's strength that allows for coordination. You can't have coordination and then go into strength. It's just the way that it works. What's it called? Pedagogy, Ryan?
Mm-hmm.
The basics of when people learn to move, as kids. You have to have strength, and then it moves into coordination.
Movement literacy, we call it. Yep.
Yeah. So I think the big point here is we're talking about the development of strength, and we have this idea of bodybuilding where it's about building big muscles, and strength happens in so many ways. And a lot of it is happening neurologically of training the brain to move the body better. So we got to appreciate all of these aspects of how strength is developed, not just about big, doing bicep curls to make your biceps bigger for the beach. But I wanted to start there because Ryan, I know you head off to other things, but is there anything else you want to add to the discussion before you run off?
Yeah, I got till 8:30, so we're gonna be okay.
Oh, nice.
This is
Okay,
an important one.
we got to pass.
Yeah.
All right, good deal.
So,
all right, well, let's go ahead.
Keep
You have
going.
anything
Yeah,
to say?
keep
Hey,
rolling.
Matt, can I address a question we just got in the chat
Certainly.
real quick?
Jump
It's
in.
from one of our regulars, Cody Ballin, always chiming in with good stuff. And he's saying that he's got a 10-year-old who's the app's recommending the red and purples, which is good. There's nothing wrong with that. But what I always say for the guys that are really serious is either you want to get the full setup of the bands or the band that you're recommended for and the one below it. And now that he's ready for that red and purple, I like to always say have a high and low day. So even if the app is telling you to use the red and purples, and let's just say you pitched yesterday, your fatigue score on the app was a little much, drop down to the green and yellows on that day, especially since he's 10. If you're a high school player, maybe, and it's recommending you use the blues and the yellows on the days after you pitch, maybe drop down in that resistance because you can vary the intensity by changing the resistance of the band. So nothing wrong with the app recommending your 10-year-old to use those heavier resistances, but he doesn't have to use that heavy resistance every day. Kind of take a feel for it, maybe drop him down in that resistance, and hopefully that answered your question, Cody.
Awesome. Thanks, Jordan. All right, so it's all great. We can talk about theory and what makes sense on paper. But then if you've ever been out at a baseball field with a bunch of 10-year-olds, things tend to look a little different. So I've invited Dugan on to talk specifically around this because he's in the thick of it right now, coaching his oldest son's baseball team. And what's Miles, 9 right now?
Miles is 9. Mm-hmm.
Cool. And he has really honed a process of developing pitchers at this age that includes ArmCare. So I'm going to hear about your process and how do you make this work in a real life situation?
Sure. So I honed this. This is not just throwing this at, little leaguers. This was honed over time where I was coaching at the collegiate level for 3 years. I was a head coach at a high school and was assistant coach, totaling 8 years. And we developed some of these processes that I've now taken to the little league level. I will say, as a dad, you go out there your first day of T-ball and you're coaching your kid and you have this elaborate practice plan. And I was super excited. And I asked the players, who knows where first base is? And no one could raise their hand. So I had to really bring it down a level. Just knowing that, but I think it's a combination of coming up with a good process for building players up, make sure that your workload management is there, and then how do we get them strong at that younger age? And so a huge part of that is incorporating ArmCare and crossover symmetry. So what I do with my players, I have 8 stations set up and I have 10 players on my team, and I take them through crossover symmetry. How do we activate the arm? And much like what Ryan was talking about, teaching them the movements, I just have everyone kind of circle up and we go through the movements without the bands first. And so that's kind of my process to teach them. Then I take the exercise chart and we just teach the players how to read the chart. Like what band to use. Okay, see this movement right here. This is how we go through. And then we're going to take the cords. We're going to move them from eye level down to knee level. So we take them through that whole process. And once we take them through it one time, the kids are pretty good. Actually, I teach them how to set it up and take it down as well, because that's kind of a pain in the butt if the coach has to set that up every single practice. So I really make the kids accountable. They know they're not allowed to touch a ball before they do that. And so we have half the kids doing the shoulder arm activation, and then we have the other kids doing the hip and core band. And so we got 5 kids doing that, and then we just flip flop it, and then we get into our throwing program. So that's. And to help motivate them, I'm the coach and I'm telling them they have to do it. So that's number 1. But 2, what we've seen is, kids are getting stronger. We have detailed studies from Drake University showing the strength increases in the youth player, just using the shoulder activation and the iron scap strengthening protocols. And it's extensive. It'll blow your mind. Ryan, I'm not sure if you can quote it off the top of your head, but it was pretty impressive.
Yeah, I remember you sent me the information. Yeah, it's when you get the athletes, like in what Dugan's saying is form first, and then function is going to happen, happen after. And it's amazing, like what a young kid, when they get, comfortable after 7 to 10 days, even some high school guys I work with, their strength goes up really quickly because it's like, whoa, things are awake.
That's neuromuscular.
Yeah. And it is, it is on the brain level too. And I think, the other thing I would like to see our society do, especially our tribe that are actually using the ArmCare process regularly, is really gamify it, and build value with the kids early. Like, here are the performance reward seeking benefits. You're an outfielder, you want to throw a guy out at the plate, you're going to have a strong arm. You're really far back. This is how we do it, and then also on the parent level, telling them that, this process, getting these kids into this, is going to create a long-term career. And you hope, I would think it would also be a step up for those are, people listening that are in the little league level, get the parents involved, get them knowledgeable. Like if they're just coming to practice once a week, to do this, get the parents involved so that they can start to teach them at home. I got a nephew who's 11, and he plays in a high level league in Atlanta, and they just set up a door strap in their basement, and year round, our door straps, they can get that work in. And, I've obviously educated my brother-in-law, because now there's a parent that, he's down there working out too, using the bands, in his basement. So you can create such huge momentum, but the research is there, for these young athletes, the safest throwing velocity gain, the stabilization. I mean, any athlete, but I mean, the younger athletes developing these habits is really what it's all about. This is a high performance habit, is training your throwing arm, training your body. And, in the summer when they're playing video games with their friends, the friend leaves, take the half hour and get it in.
Mm-hmm. I want to transition this conversation a bit to not just developing athletes physically, but also developing specifically pitchers. Because Dugan, I know you have a pretty specific process. Because if we go back to that Fly6 study that we referenced at the start of this conversation, their big conclusion was that pitching more than 100 innings in a year significantly increased the risk of injury. And there's some details behind that data too that I think we got to look deeper into, that is not reported in the evidence. That, if we're looking at pitchers who are throwing over 100 innings in a season, they're probably most likely the best pitchers, and they're throwing the hardest. And so there's some confounding variables that go into that impact. But still, I think it's important to recognize that the increase in volume equals an increase in fatigue, and therefore an increase in injury. And coaches are in a hard position of, they got to throw guys out there who can throw strikes. And, with so many kids on the team, that results in some heavy workloads on the kids who can actually do that. So Dugan, talk a bit about how you are being successful at getting pitchers out on the fields, rather than just throwing guys out there and hoping they could get some outs.
Yeah. Before I'll jump right into that, but the last thing I wanted to say, when incorporating this and getting team buy-in in terms of the arm activation, arm strengthening segment, we tell everyone, on average, players are going to gain about 5 miles an hour throughout the season if they follow this process. And that's very motivating for a player. And so, yes, we're going to get the arm strength benefits, and that's where the velocity is most likely coming from, is strength rather than, stretching out the arm. So I'll start off by saying that. But in terms of preparing our players, so I live in Florida. The season starts March 1st, and tryouts are right around end of January. So practice is really, you got a month to get your guys ready, right? And so how we go about this is it's my first week, we're working on throwing as much as we can. And one of the problems with Little League baseball, and we're on the rec sites, this is not travel ball. We're not practicing every day, is getting players to throw enough, because we're really limited by these practices, like 2 or 3 practices a week. And to build up the arm, you need to throw more than that. And so one of the things I encourage our kids to do, and I talk to the parents about, is, find a buddy, throw with your dad. We need to get more throwing sessions in to better prepare the arm for the season. So that's the first thing we do. And I make sure to communicate, don't overdo it. Don't go over there and throw 200 pitches with your dad on day 2. So we make sure that, everything's in moderation. So that's one of the things we do as a part of our throwing program. At the end of each throwing program, so I incorporate position specific drills within our throwing program. So we'll back up, we'll reach kind of a max distance for the day, and the guys kind of work their ways in. So if they're we're working on footwork, mechanics. So we'll get into we call it 4-way ground ball. So we go down and then we work on transitioning our feet, lining up our shoulders, so we make an accurate throw to our partner. And then we work on a forehand backhand. But we actually took it a step further now, to where we'll be here. I'll have everyone raise their glove hand and say, okay, we're going to take a crossover step to the glove side. So we work on moving over to the glove side, get in front of the ball, rotation, and then we'll do the same thing with our arm side, crossover step. So we're actually moving our feet a lot. Catchers are, and hopefully you got to develop catchers at that level, because of pass balls kill you. And so we're working on catchers, kind of pop to pop, throwing down to second base as a part of these throwing drills. But at the end, I want to develop accuracy with all my pitchers. So what we do is we back up just beyond kind of second base. And so we'll have somebody on the foul line, someone just beyond second base, and then we'll put somebody's hat right in the middle. And the goal for you is to kind of go from the stretch and throw and hit the hat. And it's a two-way deal, because the receiver is actually working on a ground ball and they're getting in front of it. And then, obviously you're trying to throw the hat from an accuracy standpoint. So that's like basically the first week is we're trying to instill these habits. We're communicating with the parents. Hey, we cannot just throw 2 to 3 times a week and expect these guys to be ready for the season. And so that's one of the processes we go through. Then the next week, we're going to build up to a 10-pitch pin. So I have all the pitches go in there. And our goal is for the players to be throw 60% strikes. So we got to be 6 out of 10. And I put that as the benchmark for any pitcher to pitch in the game. So it really is a good job of weeding out those players that, quote, want to pitch, but just aren't accurate enough to get it over the plate. So, they're not walking everyone around. It's not going to be fun for anyone. It's not going to be fun for that player. So we really established that benchmark of 60% strikes in practice to kind of qualify to pitch in the game. And so we're going through this process and we're building it up. And the nice thing about Florida, the league does a really nice job of the first month of the year. So all of March, you're only allowed to throw 1 inning. So that really helps regulate the volume for some of these pitchers. But for me personally, I have another kind of pitch count threshold that I use for pitchers. Any pitcher for me that pitches more than 30 pitches, I won't let them pitch 30 pitches in an inning. So I'll let them start a batter maybe with 28 pitches, but after that, if that's not the third out or we've reached the 4-run inning cap, they're out. And so I want to make sure that that's understood, because once we get above those thresholds, that the pitchers are definitely going to be fatigued. That's a very stressful inning, and we need to get them out. And we need to get somebody else in. So that's one of the thresholds that I personally put in. Just trying to make sure that the guys aren't pitching well fatigued. And then in April, we're able to extend guys to 2 and 3 innings. But by that time, they're built up. And then if you pitch for us, you have to go immediately after your outing, and you have to do the recovery segment for crossover symmetry and making sure that these guys are are focusing on getting that muscle pump and improving the recovery process as well. So again, I'm dealing with 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, I sprinkle on a few 10-year-olds. You know, I am monitoring my own son with the ArmCare app and making sure that, you know, his thresholds are there. But you know, that's our process.
Awesome. It's great stuff. Now, Jordan, you're working at the high school level, and you're actually implementing the ArmCare system with your high school team. Talk a bit about that process, because when I watched one of your practice, it moved seamlessly. I could tell that you took a lot of things you learned at the big league level and brought it down to the high school level. So what does ArmCare look like? Because now we are looking at that age range where players are at the highest risk of injury. What are you doing to help that problem?
Yeah, so we just set the routine that they know in advance. If they're on the mound, they know who's starting. I try to announce that stuff like it is at the professional or the collegiate level, which is, you know, mine and Ryan's background of kind of getting in there and implementing dynamometry. So those guys show up, they know exactly, like for instance, today we have one of our guys starting later today. He knows as soon as he gets to the field, he does his shoulder activation, he gets his body going, he does a fresh exam. He instantly comes over, he just shows me his data. From there, I make the adjustment on the pitch count, whether we're keeping him the same, whether we're deloading and having a guy ready to come in quick, or whether we're skipping the start and pushing it to another day. So we're using that information to make on-the-fly adjustments. But if you're handling those things, especially on your bullpen day, you should be able to get in there where on that game day, you don't need to make any adjustments to your starter in general. And then you always have those bullpen guys coming through. One thing I have noticed specifically in implementing it with the high school level is the biggest problem is body comps. So we'll have some guys that have really good arm scores because they're so light. And then we'll have some guys that have really bad arm scores because they're so heavy. And there's almost that no in between where nobody's at that ideal body weight. So I know that's our biggest challenge in implementing it is looking at the arm score and understanding how to make those adjustments off that. Because as you're dealing with an older and more mature athlete, they're getting more into those ideal body weight ranges. So to me, the high school and the youth level that Dugan's at actually have a lot more similarities than they do differences. If anything, I would say because most of those athletes are going to be extremely underweight or they're going to be extremely overweight on those aspects. And it's like, not because the guy is, you know, 210 and 6% body fat. It's usually because they're well on the other side of that with a higher amount of body fat or almost no body fat and weigh 105 pounds. So those are your two huge variables in implementing it. And for those guys, you know, Ryan was talking, a bigger athlete is just harder to kill. A bigger athlete with the right body comp is harder to kill. I think that's one of the big caveats to put in there. Mass does not equal gas. Lean mass equals gas and health when it comes down to it. So we want to make sure they're in a good body comp. But that's one of the big things there is make the on the fly adjustment on the day. Is it better to push that starter to another day, or instead of letting him go in my state, they can go 110 pitches? Is it better for me to cut this guy down to 55 as opposed to getting him hurt and now I lose him for a year, 2 years, 3 years, or hurt this guy for 18 months going to college? So really using that data to adjust and put the player first and make your obvious your on the fly adjustment. And then the great thing is it's going to give you that customized training. As soon as you finish, it'll let you know exactly what to do based on your pitch totals.
Well, one of the things, if I could jump in here, you know, as we're having this conversation, because I'm going to reveal a strategy that we tried to do with the Angels and it didn't take. And I know you know, some coaches might not be comfortable with this, but one of the concerns I have, you know, just kind of building off of what Dugan said, when an athlete has a 30 pitch inning, you know, let's just say this athlete's 19 or 18, high school, he's your frontline starter. I think it's like 105 is the pitch smart standards, and he's ready for him. We test him out with our ArmCare device, and this kid's arm's off the charts, strong. Kid goes in, first inning gets slammed, and you yank him. Okay. My concern is the next game he throws to 105. Okay. So he's had a 3x increase in pitch counts. And one of the things that, you know, with the Angels, this happened and it didn't go very far, and I wish it did, is that my belief is you got to get this athlete to an intermediate level. You know, it's like, it's a shock. when you're not throwing at the same intensity and then you're given this higher demand. You either have to do it in the week as trying to build, give them some more volume with a higher intensity. But for me, I think if it's possible, it might be tough. You get a parent who's got a radar gun, pocket radar, or one of the radar technologies. Doesn't matter what, but you take the kid to the bullpen. Maybe there's an older brother or somebody that hangs around that could catch this kid. You put the radar gun, you say, okay, I want you to stay at this number. And they throw about 80%, and they try to get to at least, 50 or 60% point. 60, let's get to 60 pitches, because I think you're developing capacity, and you're also developing, the player in a way that they might work on some things in there. They're getting a little bit more development with a coach, and then the jumps aren't so high. Like, it gets even scarier, when a pitcher's like, okay, he gets knocked out in the first inning one game, second inning the next, he's struggling, but he's your best starter. And then all of a sudden he has this breakout game, and we see these spikes. And I think that's a potential problem, that could potentially be solved with something like that. And I know it's tough because you don't got a lot of catchers, on the team that might get catching practice doing that. Or maybe you do have kids who are on the bench that, they're learning to catch based on that. But I do think there could be an opportunity to reduce our injury risks by normalizing the workload a little bit and not having these huge swings. Jordan, I don't think you were big on that, but like, I'm thinking that having a step between and utilizing it in a developmental way could be helpful.
Yeah. And I'll give my thoughts on that is, I don't like just being, it's like, hey, you know what, you threw, you got to, we'll use Dugan's case there. It's like you threw 30 pitches in your last outing. You didn't make it out of the first inning, or you threw 32, finished that hitter, and then we don't send you back out for the second. So now your next outing, you can only go like 60. It's like, well, okay, you're a starter. You need to be built up, because now if you don't, then you throw your bullpen at risk. And now you're having a whole bunch, because now if you didn't get out of the first, well, guess what? Your bullpen just got throttled. And now 5, 6, 7 days later, you're going to throttle your bullpen again. It's like you need to have a good in-between throwing progression to where you can take care of that. You obviously didn't throw very much. So when you do your post-exam, if you're not in that warning area, then day one probably doesn't need to be a day off anymore. You can start building your volume. Day two, if you're running an arm primer or a fresh exam, if you're worried about it, find out where that athlete is, adjust your throwing volumes. Day 3, day 4 on a 7-day, now you can either adjust that bullpen up or down based on where those readings are, and you can still have that volume. So instead of maybe a one long toss day in between, maybe there's a long toss and a moderate toss day. I would say for the most part, now you're getting a good feel for this too, and talking with high school players and even a lot of the minor leaguers around too, not just with the Angels, but multiple organizations that we talk to. Most of them are not having a lack of throwing volume between outings. They usually have too much throwing volume between outings. And we just met with a guy, I'm not going to use names, obviously, but his arm strength kept trending down over the course. And we're only, 4 outings into the minor league season right now. Kept trending down. We went through and said, well, what does your throwing schedule look like? And it's high volume, 40 pitch bullpen, man. High volume, no volume, pitching a game. So it's like everything's up. And I've been paying attention to his numbers since we've told him to adjust his throwing on that wave load and undulation. All of a sudden, he's now pitching into the 6th and 7th inning, and he's given up 2 runs over like 14 and a third in his last 2, as opposed to he couldn't get out of the 3rd inning before. So by adjusting those throwing volumes and wave loading so you can always be at that peak performance, that's your goal, is to make sure by the time you roll into day 5, 6, or 7, whatever you're throwing at as a starter, you're at a full tank of gas.
Yeah.
You're going to get more out of there if you have a full tank of gas. It doesn't matter how you monitor, your wave loads. If you're not at a full tank of gas, you can spike it or not spike it. If you are not at a full tank of gas, you've already set yourself up for failure. And that's my big thing. Get to a full freaking tank of gas and be ready to go.
That's really good. I want to hit this question real quick. This is specifically for you, Jordan. It came from James. He was asking about the validity of the readings using the arm strength sensor for youth and high school players. And he says, if he's not supervising them, he feels like there's a lot of cheating going on. And I understand that with a high school player, they might not have that metacognition to see like I'm doing this arm strength for the value of myself, and they just see it as, oh, this my buddy here, he has an arm strength score of 125. How do I hit that? So how are you instructing the testing process at the high school level to making sure it's consistent and accurate?
So it looks like he just popped up another one there. So he was referring to, I'm guessing he says range of motion there. So number one is like the player needs to understand if there's a huge spike in an increase in range of motion, that's just as scary as a loss of range of motion. So the athlete should know, hey, you need to be consistent in your range of motion testing. Because if they're trying to cheat it and dumping the shoulder or flipping their spine back, whatever it is to increase it, it's like, well, I'm shutting that guy down. Because if his strength is the same and he's got 30 more degrees of range of motion all of a sudden, that's terrifying. Because we have no strength change and a huge increase of range of motion. That's a high risk of injury. So for me, I would shut that kid down, and they're going to learn real quick. You better do the testing with some consistency, whether I'm watching or not. So my players know it's not about setting PRs. And if we're seeing increases in range, I want to see increases in strength. But when it comes to the strength testing, I want to see them obviously trying to set a max every time, because I want them to do that max output on that isometric, because it's activating their arm. So one of our guys who started figuring out the testing is meant to be max effort on the strength aspect of it, he's had like, gosh, when we went through and did the math, he's still going to have 2 starts this year before we finish the season. But he's increased his pitching numbers by over 100% on everything. So he had an 18-mile-an-hour increase in his freshman year. For freshmen, he led the state in strikeouts, but he also led it in walks. But this year, he's top 10 in the state in strikeouts, and he is reduced his walks per 7 by like almost 5. And his strike percentage, just of like in the strike, we don't have K-zone and all this stuff at the high school level. We don't have TrackMan. We don't have that budget. But his strike percentage has gone up roughly like 30%. His FIP is decreased. His ERA is decreased. His WHIP has decreased. Like all these numbers that project success are getting better. But we haven't went in through there and hammered out mechanics or done anything other than just get this kid strong enough to handle his consistency of movement. So it's big things like that. Like this will probably be the first summer that this kid actually starts doing some mechanics work, but it's going to be more performance based, because now he's topping out at 82. We want to get him to 84, 85, 86. So health is set. Everything's good to go. And then we're going to start hammering that out. But for this player here, understanding that max range of motion is not about setting a max. It's about setting consistency and understanding where you're going. And then strength is about setting your max, because that's going to dump that calcium into the arm and really prep it to be ready to go on that isometric aspect. So hopefully that makes sense. And Ryan, did I leave anything out on the science on that? No, I just have a crossover hat on, not a lab coat.
Yeah, no. I think you're hitting the nail on it. I mean, the biggest thing is open hand. Like, you can tap them in the stomach. Just like if someone's going to punch you in the stomach, that's how you got to hold it while you're doing the test, and close your eyes. First stop. If they're watching their hand, that's a problem. If they're arching their back, the technical elements, it's all in the app and it's in the video. And I know kids can get impatient. If you're a coach, queuing them up, just like what you're saying, just you don't tell them, you tell them, like what you said, Jordan, you don't want to be competitive in range of motion. We want to be consistent range of motion, consistent strength. That's what keeps you performing optimally. If you become an elastic band and you start getting thinner and longer because your muscles aren't strong, that's a problem. So it takes a little bit of education, for them to say, this isn't something that we want to compete on. If we test, consistently, then I, as a coach, know how to steer your training. If there is a restriction, we're able to, on the app, you're able to put on in something that's going to, improve your mobility. So, it could be a quick conversation. And the place where they do want to get competitive, in my opinion, is in the strength testing. The gamifying it, kids like, getting excited about it. And they want to have the strongest arm on the team.
Yeah.
And it goes back into your max strengthening and isometric. And going back to even all the old Tom House stuff, it's like he would prehab guys and even rehab guys with isometrics. So there's so many positives from that physiological standpoint that come from doing an isometric, not just in building stability in that movement and strength around that range, but you're also it's a calcium that dumps in, right, Ryan?
Yeah. Well, yeah, the calcium dumps in, you got the muscles are primed. It's like, in a simple sense, it's like taking your car battery and hitting the jumper cables on it. You're waking it up again, right? Your nervous system's all jacked up, and you're ready to go. That's how, that's got to work. And there's not enough of that, especially for the kids. Like, if the kids aren't using bands and they're just doing arm circles and dynamic stuff, you're not gonna really activate the muscles the way they need to. We talk a lot about that in our courses, about it's called potentiation, and these processes are huge. Relievers in the bullpen, getting them ready. There's things that they got to do to get the arm juiced up a little bit. Some of them have been sitting for 2.5 hours, which is no good. So there's lots of that. There is a question here, and I do want to address it, because the new element in the app is that you can turn off the range of motion. A couple of reasons why this is happening. There's a pretty influential entity that wants this not in there, is one. But two, when you test in large groups, and sometimes I run events with a lot of players on a weekend, to get them quickly through, and that you want to be able to examine, like, strength to me is where guys are really having the deficiency. I think kids stretch their arms to hell, some of them. Turning that off, just, instead of hitting the skip button that we used to have, that gets you to the strength testing quickly, and that's kind of was the design. It's not that we don't think range of motion is important. I don't want anybody who's, there's quite a number of people who are probably listening to this that, might think, oh, if we're doing that, we're seeing this in the app, we're talking about range of motion, you shouldn't do it. I have my athletes, do it. I got a lot of major league players that I serve, and they're consistent as can be, because they understand I just want to be consistent. I don't want to have my stuff all over the place, and we fix things when we see it. But, just to preface, we do think range of motion is important. We've built this for, large showcase camps and those kinds of things to get to prioritize the strength data if, they don't have time to go through everything.
Yeah. Well, I really enjoyed this conversation. I want to kind of bring it to wrap. Guys, anything else you want to say before we close this out? Okay.
You got nothing.
We did it all. We nailed it perfectly. All right. So if I could just sum it up, generally when I get a call, it says, "Hey, how old should my kid be before I start ArmCare?" At the very young level, I say as soon as a kid becomes competitive, we need to start teaching them habits around developing themselves physically. So if that kid's going to go out in the field and they care if they're going to win or lose, they're not just out there because they're going to get a juice box afterwards, but they're there because they want to be the winners of that game. Then we need to start preparing their bodies physically to handle those demands. So that's my first criteria is, are they competitive? And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing the full-on ArmCare system. As Dugan's example, he starts teaching his kids the activation series. So he just gets their bodies warmed up through using the resistance bands, clipped to the fence out at the fields, simple workout series. We just follow the exercises on the chart. And we're starting to teach some fundamental movement patterns to helping them not only get warmed up, but we're helping them build some coordination and strength about those muscle groups that support the throwing motion. And it's not just around the arm either. It's about, we're standing upright. We're helping them brace their core. We're helping them stabilize the scapula and move like an athlete. Because if you've ever worked with young kids, that's the first issue, is helping them develop the coordination of an athlete, because that's sometimes hard. Now, what about ArmCare specifically? There's no bottom end for the age that I would say you can implement this. I think it mainly comes down to that athlete's maturity and mental desire to engage in that next level. So if you're going to be forcing this upon your kid, I think it's probably a bad start for the ArmCare app. If you're going to invest $500 and you say you're going to do this or else, it's going to leave a kid with a really bad taste in their mouth about doing this extra development and the game in general. So I would say feel it out with your kid. Are they mature enough to integrate this next level of technology, which is going to require a daily check-in to report how it's feeling. It's going to require a daily reporting on how is my workloads and throwing volumes. And some kids are going to love that. It's one of the things I really think is awesome about the ArmCare app is it kind of gamifies the training process, where when you're at a young age and you start working out, you don't generally get that connection with, I'm going to do this extra work and it's going to make me better. But when I look at the app and I can say, oh man, I got 10 pounds stronger on my test, that can be really motivating for some kids. So I would say that's a good dictator on when are they ready to take that next level and start using the ArmCare system. I think it's less about when are they physically ready and when are they more mentally ready to take that extra task on. And then from there, it's keeping up with them, supporting them through the entire process. And I think there's no fear around strength training. I think that I want to leave that with the final point is you shouldn't fear strength training and trying to develop a kid physically from a young age. It just has to be appropriate and guided correctly. And I think the ArmCare app does that well. So again, another advantage of implementing the ArmCare system with your young athlete is you're going to get a guided program that's going to track their strength development. It's going to track their fatigue, and it's going to guide them through appropriate exercises rather than just giving them a, I remember when I was a kid, I got my strength training out of Muscle and Fitness magazines, which looking back on that, it was totally different than what I should be doing as a young soccer player. But it's all that was out there. It was the easiest resource to get my hands on. I wish I could go back to young me and say, hey, let me show you this. Guys, anything else to wrap it up?
Not on my end.
Okay, awesome. Well, everyone, thanks again for joining us. We'll get this posted up on our feed. So if you only caught a part of it, you can go back and watch the whole thing on our YouTube channel or our Instagram. And I think we're going to try to keep doing these every Tuesday morning. So if you want to kind of set a reminder to check back in, we'll try to stay consistent. Things come up, so I don't know if we'll always be perfect, but we'll do our best to keep answering these questions. And I know a lot of other questions came in, so that'll be ideas for future topics. So anyways, thanks again and have a great week, everybody. Take care.
See you guys.